practicing is work. It's not fun. Playing is fun. So if you're having too much fun, unless like you really, really enjoy like that tedious repeating, which can be fun, unless that's what's happening, you probably are not really practicing.
Today's guest is a renowned classical guitarist, Gohar Vardanyan. She divides her artistry between touring as a classical concert guitarist. She also has her own guitar studio where she's taught countless students, hundreds of students, including myself, a couple years ago. And lastly, you can find her creating performance and educational content on her YouTube and Instagram. So make sure to check that out as well. Thanks so much, Gohar, for having me here.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's a pleasure that you invited me to your home studio, and it's cool to see this after seeing it for a couple of years virtually. And
yeah, well, now you kind of know what the setup is. Yeah, I mean, I had the space, so why not?
And plus, meeting your virtual friends in person is always surreal.
Sometimes you don't even feel like you haven't met them in person because we're just so used to the online two-dimensional world.
Yeah, so real life is always better.
But it's great to meet you in person.
There's a lot that I want to delve in with you, especially your perspective being a concert classical guitarist and everything that goes behind creating that for aspiring guitarists and just in your personal journey and what would work for other students. But before we delve into that, I just wanted to touch a little bit on your origins. So
sure, yeah.
I know that you started at a very young age. Let's tell a little bit to my community about how you were introduced to the Spanish guitar. Also, something I'm curious about is, since you started so young, was it something that you were a little bit more forced into and then you grew to love, or if it's something that you were also initially attracted to?
No, for me, it was definitely forced into, grew to love path.
Okay.
I got introduced to classical guitar through my dad. My dad is a guitarist. He used to play flamenco and classical. And he had decided that whatever child he was going to have, boy, girl, as long as I had 10 fingers and I wasn't, completely tone deaf, I was going to play guitar.
Okay.
So, here we are. I have 10 fingers. He started teaching me from as long as I remember. Officially, when people ask me, I just say 5 years old. But it was really before that. And he would sit me in his lap with this plastic toy guitar and just play with me and stuff. When you're too little, you don't really care. It's a game for you. It's it's just something to play. But then as I got a little bit older, it was definitely bribing, because I had friends. I wanted to play with my friends. I didn't really want to practice guitar. And I never really practiced on my own anyway. It was always set up as if I was having lessons every day with my dad. So I was always supervised. I didn't start practicing on my own until I was probably 13, 14 years old. Maybe a little bit younger, maybe like 12.
So he would always sit with you during...
Yeah, and it was to great benefit because when you're little, you don't really know what you're doing, right? So the reason Suzuki works so well is because the parent is involved. So the teacher instructs the kid and the parent at the same time, so the parent can monitor what the kid is doing at home, right? So I had that. It wasn't necessarily Suzuki, but I had that built in. So everything I did was monitored by someone who knew what they were doing. So, and I never really had to sit down and practice on my own. So I didn't have one of those childhoods. I had a normal childhood with guitar sprinkled in, and even that I protested. I didn't really want that. So I was bribed into it. If I didn't fight him too much, I would get a Snickers bar. I would get ice cream. If there was some kind of performance I had to play, and then I would get new toys. So.
And what level would you say your dad achieved? Did he just play as a side passion, or was he actually performing?
He performed in the Soviet Union. He played. He toured and he played. But before I was born, he developed focal dystonia. So and the musicians would know. Yeah, his hand started closing in, like his right hand. He's a lefty, but he played, like a right-handed person. So his hand started closing in where when I knew him, when I was born, he only could use these two fingers. And this was, I guess, in the late 70s, 80s, where not a lot of knowledge was there about injuries in general. So he wasn't able to recover from it, because now I know musicians who might have had it and were able, with the current knowledge, get out of it. And so for him, he never really was able to get out of it. They didn't even know what it was, whether it was a physical thing or a neurological thing. So he really concentrated on developing technique, because he thought it was more of a physical thing and how people use their hands that would have potentially caused an injury. So he was just obsessed with technique. And that's what having your own kid to experiment, he wasn't experimenting on me because he already knew what he was doing, but having your own, you kind of have a little bit more freedom. Because you have access to that person every single day. So I would say that I probably like owe my technique, like just my ability to move on an instrument, to my dad's efforts when I was young, because I had the proper hand technique, even when I couldn't really play clean, but I would hold my hands properly, I would move properly. So that's kind of how it started.
So your dad was just trying to also safeguard you from any injuries in the future?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, you can always over-practice and be stupid about
Mm-hmm.
it and still hurt yourself, even if you have the best technique, which I never over-practice. So there's always the other opposite problem. But so he probably, the level he achieved was giving me physical abilities on the instrument. I can't say we dove too much into musicality or anything. And I was also too young and just could not care less at that age to be all musical and stuff. That came later when I started studying with my other teachers, and I was old enough to care and to develop musically.
Sure.
So he gave me the technique that eventually,
that was your first initial introduction to the guitar, and your first real teacher.
So, yes. Yeah. From age whatever, under 5 to 13, 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a nice, that's a lot of years.
It's a good chunk. A good chunk to give you the foundation.
It's funny that you said that at first it was a little bit more like a game when you were starting, because the last guest I had on, El Amir, he talked about how his dad also introduced him to the oud and then eventually to flamenco guitar.
Yeah.
And the word he liked to throw around a lot was that it was more like a game at first, and that was one of the reasons why he didn't feel forced to do it, and it became like a playful thing until he started to eventually start adding more strategy to it.
And when you're really young, it's much easier for it to be like play. When you get old enough to kind of have your own thoughts and you're starting to kind of fight against your parents, right, to develop your own character and stuff, that's when I started fighting at like 6, 7 years old.
Okay.
But when you're younger, you don't even have access that much outside of your little home world. I had friends that I played with, it's like a play date with someone. Yeah. But when you get older, you start to like push around to see like how much you can get away with. And I definitely exploited that.
Okay. So. On the topic of age, what are your thoughts on, as an educator and from your experience in the past, like with people who use that as a crutch? That, I mean, a lot of us wish we would have started at that age and like in our early years, but some of us don't start till latter years, or some people who are also professionals in other fields and want to start in their 40s, 50s. Do you still feel like that's still a chance to reach a certain level of mastery?
Definitely. I think to reach a certain level, you just have to, I think, be realistic about the level that you could reach. I've seen people start late teens, early 20s and reach incredible level what they're playing. The only thing that I always tell like my adult students, because I teach a lot of adult students, the only thing that I've noticed that usually when I see in a player and when I ask and I find out they started when they were young, I'm like, yeah, not surprising, is that extreme speed that sometimes people can have, like the really crazy virtuosic speed that comes with ease. You can push and play fast, but there's like this difficulty that is noticeable. But the ones that are just like flowing and they're playing with ease and you don't even notice, usually those people started when they were very young. It's almost like you grow with it and your brain develops with that kind of movement. Beyond that, like that effortless virtuosity, I think everything else is achievable through hard work. It's just that you might have to work a little more than someone for whom it comes naturally because they have, at 18 they already have like 13 years of experience.
Right.
Everything else comes
more time
with
to develop it.
You have the advantage of like when we were talking, like when you're young, you don't even know what you're doing. It's just like being fed to you, right? So your brain isn't really like actively involved. It's just that it's the gift that you're given for physically to develop with an instrument that you don't even understand what's happening.
I think there's probably like less overthinking when you're a kid too.
But also like that time, it's not a wasteful time, but it's a subconscious time that happens because you're not actively involved. You're just being taught and you're just copying it. When you're coming at it as an adult, you have the advantage of actually having your brain on and understanding what you're doing, and in a shorter time, maybe even learn more because you're actively learning and you have that knowledge of being an adult, the understanding, the consciousness. Where the kid, it might take longer for them to develop that because they're just a child. They just have the physical advantages. So you can catch up. It just takes a little bit more effort.
Right.
To really to play at a level where you could do it professionally.
Like you mentioned also too, it depends what type of level you're expecting to reach. Like one analogy that I like to use as a comparison, and you can tell me if you think I'm wrong or not, but I like to compare people's guitar journeys or any type of musical journey with the fitness world. And everybody has the potential to be fit and to reach a certain level of a nice physique or something, but to actually compete like in a Mr. Olympia, bodybuilding Mr. Olympia, not everyone can realistically get there because there's always going to be, you're going to have a little bit of that extra genetic push and start at an earlier age to develop all that.
You need to have, obviously, the genetics part of it. Like,
does the same thing go for like certain level of mastery? And
that I don't know if it's like the age or just like your natural ability. Like for example, for myself, doesn't matter how much I love ballet, and doesn't even matter how young I started ballet, my body type is not of a ballerina, right? Like even if I starved myself, I would not have the right body type to be competing, to be a ballerina, to be, in that professional
at that professional
world.
level. Yeah.
So whenever you're talking about the extreme ends, you're also, you have to have the genetic predisposition, the right training, the right timing, like all of that just kind of falls into it. When you're starting late, the expectations is just, you might not be able to have that same ease that your friend who started before they were born to have, play the piece at the same speed. But you can have the same musicality, because that's something that you can develop.
Right.
Musicality, I don't think age is a crutch. You can't blame starting late for not being able to be musical. The execution of the finesse, that might be something that's a bit more difficult. And also depending on what's late. Late teens, early 20s, it's not that late.
Right.
If you're starting at 50, if you're starting at 60, then your expectations have to be a little more realistic. Because then you just, not only are you dealing with less time left for you to like play, but also you have all of those years where your body has never done anything like that. But if it's like late teens, early 20s, you still have a lot, and you're still in the growing process anyway.
Yeah. Some people just need to accept that some people have to work twice as hard to get the same results as other people, and that's just, you just have to accept it. And
I see that with the same, let's say, age group. I don't know, someone in their 50s, never played the guitar. I'll have one student for whom it comes more naturally, and one student who struggles. So that's just something that the way you are. But the person that maybe struggles but really wants it and really practices well, they'll get there before the person who maybe naturally is inclined towards it but doesn't practice as much, is not as focused. At the end, like, you can balance it out.
I've noticed too that they might take advantage of the fact that they could grasp a theory a little more easily, but then they don't hammer it in as much. They think they already have it or something.
And I feel like for music, physical repetition, you can't avoid it. It's not everything, obviously, but there is a certain aspect of just actually doing it.
Right. So in terms of being a concert classical guitarist, can you inform those that aren't as keen as to what that exactly means? Is there a level of mastery or a certain level that you're expected to play at in terms of technique and repertoire to be in that circuit and to be in those stages that you perform on and the festivals that you perform on?
I mean, you have to think of, like, there's a variety though. Like, I feel like maybe in other instruments, there is a certain really high expectation before you can be a solo artist. Like, for example, if you're a concert level pianist touring the world, you're not going to be making mistakes on stage. It's just not going to happen. A solo violinist, they're not going to make mistakes. Their bad night might just be like they didn't really present the piece emotionally how they really wanted to because it was their off night. But I think for classical guitar, because our instrument is just so difficult, it's okay if you miss a couple of notes. I'm not condoning it, but like, it happens, you know, because our instrument has like very little room for error. So I think for classical guitar, the range is wider. Like, I've been to guitar performances where it's not necessarily that impressive what they're doing, you know, but they have a career because the music that they offer and everything, it's great. And then I've been to some concerts where it's like you're just blown away by the person's ability to play the instrument. I think for us, it's a wider range of what your level could be, and you could still have a performing career. Where in other instruments, I think the competition's higher. Like, you know, who the person who would be a concert artist, concert pianist, let's say, versus a person who's going to be more not going to be on international stages, let's say.
For sure,
you know?
yeah.
For us, it's a wide variety, but you still have to be able to deliver the music. You know, you still have to be able to choose the pieces that you're playing, technically execute them, and, you know, say something with them.
Do you tend to go a little bit more towards high-level repertoire, or is it something that you almost feel like you're required to do? Like,
I think I felt the requirement more when I was younger, and it's a personality too. Like, I like hard pieces. I like the challenge. There's an element of look at me, how how hard a piece I can play, That starts to go away the older you get. But when you're younger, it's almost like you can't really make a career playing like Lagrima, like Tarega, because it's just, you're not going to compete with others. So usually you need to impress somehow, right? So like when you're starting out, you're going to have to play pieces that show your skill level, that you can play these difficult pieces. But as you get older and you establish yourself more, you're going to care less about showing off, and you're going to care more about the music. And then also people are going to know you. Maybe they already admire you for, your career, like all the years. Then you could get away with playing much easier pieces, but now you're playing them with your input, and people are gonna want to hear how you specifically are performing
your interpretation.
A piece that might not be as flashy.
So basically to establish yourself first by showing
I think
what you
that's
can
how
do,
it ends
and
up
then,
being. It doesn't seem like the right way, because music is not like a competition, but how would you establish yourself? Like there's competitions that you're doing, and if you're competing in a artist competition, you have to play difficult repertoire, because you're going to get, if someone plays really easy things and plays it perfectly, and the next guy plays really difficult pieces and plays it perfectly, who do you think is going to win? Right? They're both played perfectly, but like clearly the one that also had more challenge. I'm not saying that one is like better, but when you're competing
for specifically talking about competitions,
and when you're playing concerts, or when you're first starting out, that's kind of the route people go through competitions.
Right.
And it has to be something interesting, for people to... Things I feel like are changing now because of social media. Because I noticed that people who are playing at an okay level, let's just say not like, you're not going to be blown away by their physical, technical abilities, but they have a very big following on social media. So they're getting popular, but their playing is like, it's great, it's not bad. Of course it's bad, like no one's going to advance. But you can grow a huge audience for whatever reason, and you would never win a guitar competition in your life, because like the skill level isn't there, but people will buy tickets to go see you play, right? So that's changing.
Well, I'd like to say, like on that note, that specifically, I think that always comes to show that people connect with the artist themselves over, this is just speaking across all genres, that's when somebody gets knocked down for playing too low level, or that they're not too advanced, it's usually that people are just connecting because they're connecting with that specific artist, and they don't care what their level is, or
I think that's what the social media is kind of opening
and now it's
up.
bleeding into the classical world, where that wasn't always the case.
Because before, also we don't have the gatekeepers as much anymore. Like before, the gatekeepers were like the recording and the labels, the managers, the agencies. You don't really need to have an agent really anymore.
Right.
It's great if you do, but you don't have to be able to make a living doing it. So you don't have that filtration system, where before, like, it had someone was keeping that gate. Like, okay, you're going to hire this person, or they're going to hire that person for the new record. Now it's more open, so the people decide what they like. And you're right, maybe they're more connected to the more beautiful pieces that might not be that challenging, but the way it's delivered, or the specific person.
The way a specific person interprets that piece.
And that's just something it's changing, so you have to kind of adapt to it. So when the level is there, it's like, again, it's a mix. Sometimes it's going to be, you're going to be blown away, and sometimes it's like, it's just beautiful music and you don't really care, how flashy it is or not.
For your personal enjoyment, is that how you feel about it basically too?
My personal enjoyment, I like the flashy stuff.
You like you like hearing the flashy stuff?
No, for myself. No, I mean when I'm playing.
I mean, when you actually go out to listen or see a concert, how do you feel about? Are you usually looking to go see?
I like to,
or does
if I'm being honest.
Does it depend on the artist too?
I'm trying to, if it's a friend I'm playing, I don't care. I'm going to go. If it's a friend playing, it's a colleague playing, it's whatever they're playing, it's great.
Right.
But if I'm being honest with myself, like looking back the last couple of years, the concerts where I walked out and I'm like, oh my God. Usually
you like to see a little bit of the flash.
It's been, it's been something that, like, you watch them play and you're like, how in the world do they do that? So I like to see the fireworks. But those fireworks are not necessarily like fast and like loud. That's not, it could be Musicality fireworks, that how musical something really was. But generally it's going to include, a little bit of showing off.
I mean, I think for me it's a blend too. Sometimes I'm okay on either end of the spectrum, and sometimes one can be too extreme, and like if it's too much flash just for the whole night, then it's like,
if it's the whole night, it gets a little bit
like,
boring.
okay, I could get bored too. But But
if it's a nice mix,
okay, yeah,
where
a nice mix is
ideal. Like they show their musicality. You have these pieces that really evoke some kind of emotion, but they also show like, hey, I'm doing this and you can't do it. It's like, I'm joking, of course, but you watch that and it's impressive. It's impressive when you see a human just like yourself achieve something that is really difficult to, like, the amount of work that goes into it. I think it's admirable. So
I think that's part of the mystique from general audiences. I mean, that see any level of player, that they're always mystified by the ability. So, but us as musicians, we're always going to see it on a different
because we know what's under the hood.
Yeah,
we know exactly like what they're doing, whether it's like really difficult and they're achieving it. It's like, wow, how easy, how musical, and yet like how difficult it actually is. Or it looks fancy, but it's actually not that hard to do, which sometimes impresses musicians. You're like, oh my God, this is so hard. And it's like, nah, it's really not. But
I like to compare it to the magician's smoke and mirrors, as they say. Especially in flamenco, people get very impressed by some of the smaller little rasgueados. And
oh my God, those are so impressive. Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to do much besides one quick rasgueado.
I had that conversation with a mom of a student, and she had seen a video of someone playing, and like that part, it was a Rodrigo piece, if I'm not mistaken. It had some rasgueados in it. And he's like, oh my God, this is so like, and I'm like, listen, that's the easiest part.
That's the easiest.
That is literally, and the student knew, like, he's like, see, I told you, it's literally the easiest part to do, but it's so impressive looking. And yet the part that looks very smooth and not like a big deal, that's actually hard to do.
Exactly.
Like that way. But that's not what it's impressive looking.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen that from audiences.
Yeah. But I mean, we're also treating it's music, right? Like I mentioned it, we're making it seem like it's a sport, but it is music. Ultimately, it has to be emotive.
Oh
somehow.
Yeah. In terms of concert prep, that's something else I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
What's your process like? I know we were talking about that yesterday a little bit when we went out, but tell me a little bit about your process of when you have a concert coming up, if it's a new piece or if it's an old versus an old piece, and when do you start preparing? How's your strategy and regimen? Because I've heard everybody has a different regimen.
Different things. It really will vary based on the program I'm playing, how old that program is, how many pieces on that program are something I've played a very long time or they're completely new. Personally, this far into playing concerts, I have, certain pieces that I've played for a while. And those I kind of think of as my columns that hold the program together, because I know
your staple pieces,
like I know that if I play the newer ones not so well because they're new, at least like I can be like, hey, look, but I can play. I promise I can play by using the pieces that I've played for a while, because the piece matures on stage. Like you can do all the practicing at home until you put it in front of people and you test it in front of people. You don't really have control over that piece. So the more you play it in front of people, the easier it becomes. What I do is I'll probably change about 20 minutes of the program. Usually, concerts are like a little over an hour, right? So with intermission, it's more. But let's say 60, 65 minutes of music, maybe 70 minutes of music. I'll have about 20 minutes of it whenever I do change. That would be the new ones that are getting introduced into the program. And the other pieces are something that I've played before, even maybe the year before. So I typically change my program around like maybe 2-3 years. Because realistically, I'm not going to repeat a place back to back. So if I'm playing concerts, I'm playing in different venues for different audiences. So of course you're going to play the same repertoire for the year, or depending on how many concerts you play.
Right.
So for me, it's kind of 2-3 years where I start to repeat a venue where the audience might have some of the same people that came to my previous concert. In which case, it's nice to have something fresh in a program. I've never changed the whole entire program from scratch.
Okay.
So in that case, the pieces that I've been playing for a while, I don't need to start practicing them 6 months before a concert. It's something that I always play. So as long as I'm in shape, and maybe a week before the concert, I really, really practice them to just be more so in shape. The newer ones that's what takes the longest time. So if I'm going to learn a piece that's like 10 minutes long, depending on the difficulty, could take 9 months to a year to get it from I don't know this piece to, I can play this piece.
To like concert ready.
Ready.
Yeah.
And then that first time is still very nerve-wracking because it's that first time you're actually performing it. Then the second time gets better, third time gets better. Eventually that piece starts to get incorporated into your program where it starts to require less practicing. So that doesn't have like one exact answer because it's really case by case.
It depends on the repertoire.
Depending on the repertoire, the piece, the length of the piece, the difficulty of the piece, the genre of the piece. I find Spanish music much easier to play, like learn and play, versus Bach. Bach takes much longer to learn, even though it's less flashy, maybe not even as physically difficult. There are so many Spanish pieces that are physically way more difficult to play than really any Bach. But Bach is more difficult to execute because everything's so transparent.
Yeah.
So that's going to be, it's going to vary.
So in terms of an actual rehearsal, like a practice session, if you're, for example, preparing some new material versus the old, well, how would you break up that session?
If it's...
And how much time, just for people who are always curious about how many hours go into a practice session?
Yeah, well, that's also going to vary. So if I had a gap between concerts, let's say that gap was like summertime, like usually I have fewer concerts in the summer. So let's say for 3 months, I didn't have a single concert. During those 3 months, I'm not going to practice the concert repertoire. That let's say it's like July, I played my last concert. My next concert is October, for example. July and August, I'm probably not going to practice the pieces that I need to play in October because those are set pieces, unless there's a new one. So I'm going to practice that new one to build it up until it's time to practice. I would say maybe 3 weeks or like maybe a month before the concert, I will do like a little test run of all the pieces that I intend to play on that program. I will already know what I'm going to play. So maybe a month before, I will just check to see like, can I still play these? And then maybe 3 weeks before, I'll start kind of like getting back in, because just being able to like play through doesn't mean that you have the muscle and the stamina to play certain pieces, you know, at full performance, kind of with this full energy. So maybe like 3 weeks before, I'll start really practicing. The newer pieces will always get the bigger chunk of my practice session.
Okay.
And the ones that are already, you know, my workhorses that have been around, I probably will still practice daily or every other day, but I might not spend like an hour on each piece, you know, be less. So I just go by how bad they sound.
How long are we talking for the session? Like a session?
I personally, like, I don't practice more than 3 hours now.
About 3 hours? Okay.
Yeah, now.
Right.
Yeah, I used to do about 4 when I was in college, when that's the only thing I had to do was just go to class and...
Right, when you had...
So I would do 4. Now I just don't have time to do 3. And because I don't have, it's just me deciding what to play, I can manage that. In college, you have all this new repertoire that you have to constantly learn. And then you need the 4 hours. Like you sometimes need more. But I would say like 2 to 3 would be it.
Leading up to the day of the concerts, that's also something that people have different strategies for. Like the day of, some people don't like to touch or play too intensely.
I definitely play.
Do you play full out a little bit beforehand?
Yeah, I'll play the whole program once.
Oh, you will play on the same day?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I used to do more because just less experience, more freaked out. I would practice more, and I've learned that doesn't work. If I practice too much on the day of the concert, you end up just mentally, by the time the concert comes around, you're like, I'm done. I just don't want to play this anymore because you're just sick of it. So I find a nice balance is just one run through. Usually just like about an hour, and that's it. And then when I get to the concert venue, I'll just like warm up and stuff, and that should be enough. I never found the need to do more than that. But any less than that, even though it's probably going to be just fine, because you're not going to literally, like if you can't play those pieces by that time, it's too late. Like, you know, the day of the concert is not going to teach you how to play those pieces.
Exactly.
It's a mental thing. It's just, you do it to make yourself feel better. Realistically, it probably has zero effect on your physical ability to play those pieces. But mentally, you're like, okay, I'm still a guitarist. Like, I can play.
Yeah.
If I didn't play on the day of the concert, I would just freak out for no like logical reason.
You just need that.
Yeah, so I just like run through.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't run through all the pieces. Maybe like the pieces that are the newer ones, the ones I'm more worried about. Yeah, but not overdoing it, because overdoing it is just, I have the capability of playing 4 hours a day, but usually the 4th hour, your hands aren't as fresh. And for the concert, you want it to be the freshest it can be, because you're gonna probably play more out, because you're in a big concert hall. You might accidentally play a little bit faster than you intend to, because you might be nervous.
The nerves, yeah.
Yeah, so you want your hands to be fresh so you can handle it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard everything from people who don't like to play too intensely, and people who like to overdo it a little bit too much.
I know people who like to take a nap right before. I'm not a napper at all. I just cannot sleep in the afternoon. So taking a nap before the concert would probably disorient me. Like I'm not on this planet anymore.
Same here.
Some people have like specific routines. I've not consciously, but almost consciously, I don't have any specific routine, only because I don't want that to become a crutch. Because when you're playing around, you don't know what you're going to be doing on the day of the concert. Not always. Sometimes you don't get it your way, right? Like I prefer not to teach on the day, like not to teach a master class the day I perform. But have I had to do that? Of course.
Yeah.
So having like, if you have a certain routine that makes you get in a mood and get comfortable, and you don't end up getting it, I don't want that to deter like a good performance.
It could throw you off.
So I always have it totally, whatever it is what it is. I just prefer certain things if I can get them, but I don't make a big deal out of it so that I have the flexibility.
And in terms of practice length, a lot of aspiring guitarists and students, they always want to know the magic formula for them. And I know there's not a perfect
There isn't a
answer.
magic formula.
There isn't. But what do you usually suggest for newbies, for people entering?
It depends on their goal. If you're younger, I wouldn't, like 2 hours is enough. Because like, first of all, let's say you're like 10, 12, 13, whatever. You're still developing. Like your body does not have the strength and the stamina to, it's like asking someone to lift 100 pounds when they're like 10. Like, no. So it's the healthier, I think, to just practice a normal amount, have a childhood, do other things so you develop as a human, right? But when you're like an older teenager, definitely going into college, you're old enough, your body is mature enough, you have enough strength to properly practice 4 hours a day, I personally find that after that, it's just like you can't concentrate as well. So then you're doing it just for doing it. But I've heard people that would just lock themselves up in the room and practice 12 hours a day. Like I know people who've done that. I've never been that person. And I think if I had to do that to play at the level that I play, I would have quit.
Yeah.
It's just like, if you really need that much time to play at a certain level,
you don't know
like
if you could have.
I know.
You don't think you would have made it? Yeah.
No, I don't love the guitar that much.
Yeah.
I love the guitar, but like, it's my life, obviously. Like, right, I play it, but I don't love it that much to sacrifice that much of my life to play at a certain level. Like, I think there's better things to do in life, So, so I feel it's like it's a nice balance. And besides, like, what kind of human are you going to be if all you've seen is inside a practice room? Like, you can't even learn to socially like interact with people. So, I would say, like, if you're serious about it, you most likely will need 3 to 4 hours. Maybe sometimes more if you're preparing for a competition.
You're talking about to get to.
Yeah, because the thing is, as I said, repetition is necessary.
Altitude.
Yeah. If you're going to be a professional at it, right?
Yeah.
There's certain repertoire you need to learn. Those pieces are really long and they're difficult. There's no way you will be able to play those pieces if you only play an hour.
There's just not enough time. Yeah.
Yeah. You also need the stamina, right? Like a concert lasts an hour and a half, right? Sometimes people say, how do you play an hour straight? I'm like, well, I can play 4 hours straight. So playing an hour is not a big deal. So if you don't have the physical ability to play your instrument at a certain volume, at a certain speed for a prolonged amount of time, you just won't be able to survive on stage when you're playing these demanding pieces. So there's this balance you have to find. And 2 hours is not going to be enough. I had a teacher tell me once that if you want to improve, like if you want to maintain what you have, you practice 2 hours. If you want to improve, it has to be at least 3 hours, like what you're doing to improve after that. And if you want to go downwards, then it's probably, if you practice less than 2 hours to an hour, you're most likely over a long period of time start to decline. Yeah. And it kind of makes sense. If I only play an hour for like a year straight, my physical abilities on the instrument will decline.
Go down. Yeah.
And if your physical abilities decline, your musicianship is going to decline too, because you're not going to be able to execute things as freely to be able to let the phrase sing, right?
Yeah.
And if I want to, and it's true, like I've noticed that like years later, this was told to me in high school, that if I want to like learn your repertoire and improve playing, I need to at least do 3 hours.
Okay. Yeah. That's that's a number that works for you.
Yeah. 3 to 4. It's just after 4, I feel like I'm not actually being productive. So, but again, it depends on the person. It depends on how much catching up you have to do, right? How fast you learn, how fast you memorize. That part is going to be very, very individual.
I mean, I know that's why it's hard to give one. Yeah. It's hard to give that advice.
And everyone wants to know. It's like the most popular question.
Yeah, it's
like,
one of the most
popular. How many hours do you
popular.
practice? But you also keep in mind, like, technically things come easy to me, right? So I don't have to practice technique as often, right? If I don't practice, it'll decline. But if you're still working, if I had to learn something that it's some kind of technical element that I'm not good at or just don't know it, right? I will have to practice more to physically catch up to actually be able to play that. But if I'm playing, I don't know, let's say I'm learning a tremolo piece. I can do tremolo at a very high speed. So all I have to learn is actual chords to the right, and then figure out the musicality, and it will still take me months to make that piece sound good. But if you're still working on your tremolo, then you're going to have to play even more, and it's going to take you even longer because you need to. So it's very like individual to the thing. There's no magic number. Like generally, I'd say no one's going to do less than 3 to 4 and achieve high levels, if you're like college level. If you're doing it for hobby, if you do 2 hours, it'll be great.
It'll be,
Yeah, you don't need to do more than that.
Like we were talking about earlier, I think consistency is a big one too.
Yes,
even if you're getting in less, but being consistent,
if it's every day,
it's better for it to be every day than just trying to cram it in all in the weekend, or
that's
like
not gonna work,
for your side passion.
That's like a good recipe for an injury.
Yeah.
Not doing anything for a couple of days and then sitting down and practicing 5 hours on one day. Perfect recipe.
Yep, exactly.
To like really ruin your hands. Yeah.
Something that we didn't talk about is that I know you have a passion for flamenco. That
I do.
I came in a couple of days ago, and we went to see a flamenco show. Ended up at a flamenco concert. So I was just curious, when did you get introduced to flamenco, and how come you didn't go down that direction or try to split your directions into flamenco?
I got introduced to it from my dad, because my dad played flamenco and from classical. We had like pictures of Paco de Lucia on like posters on our walls, to a point where like when I was a kid, I thought they were actually my dad's pictures, because my dad had a similar haircut, and they don't actually look the same, but the hair looked the same. So I thought it was my dad's pictures. And like a kid doesn't really have like that recognition of like stuff anyway. So when I was little, I played both. Very simple things like the Juan Martin, like bulerias and like sevillanas and soleares and stuff. So I kind of did start parallel. But then when we moved to the States and I was going to school for guitar, we were talking about that too, at least back then, the only degrees in music I could get would be in classical music. And also like being a female flamenco guitarist is a little bit harder, let's just say, than being a female classical guitarist. Like for me personally, male for classical guitar, I don't feel a difference. It's fine. But I think it would have been much more difficult to break into the world as a non-Spanish, I'm not Spanish, never lived in Spain, female flamenco guitarist. It's a little bit like, I would have to be really amazing for that to even work. So I think the decision was made very easily that if I was going to go to do this professionally, the classical route would have had just a better outcome. And again, like
it was easier just to focus on one
in terms of splitting, yes. In terms of splitting, that was never a question. Obviously, flamenco has absolutely helped me in classical technique, because it's just, I think everyone should learn some flamenco playing, like any classical player. It just opens up your physical abilities on the instrument. But it was never a question of like doing it professionally. Splitting it equally, too much. Even just the nails.
Yeah.
Like I would have totally ruined my nails practicing as much as I would need to play anything well, in flamenco. Even if, on a flamenco guitar with all the golpes, all the rasgados, my nails would be shot. And for classical, you need that like delicate sound, like the nails have to be perfect. So I kind of quit. When I was 13, 14, I just
left it.
Yeah, I went. Okay. It takes so much time anyway, like just to be good at playing classical.
Well, I mean, just to devote yourself to one of those genres could take a lifetime. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I would have rather, it would be like, jack of all trades or like master of one.
Yeah.
I chose the master of one.
Okay.
Don't regret it. Now, like sometimes I come back to some flamenco pieces, but I'm careful which ones I pick. I'm not going to go out there and play bulerias. Like it's not going to happen. But like Guajira de Lucia, it's like, it's a flamenco piece, but it fits on classical very well. There are no rasgados. There are very limited golpes. I'm playing it on a classical guitar. I mean, like, I know. I get all the YouTube comments like, that's not a flamenco guitar. I'm like, I know. I'm even sitting in a classical position. But, the elements that you're using, they're very classical. Some scales, some arpeggios, so it's doable. I intend to do the percusión flamenco, the zapateado, which is also very much classical technique.
It's very adaptable to classical.
Yeah, if people didn't know, it could have totally passed off as a classical like zapateado. It's just that it's, people know it. It's not. but I'm going to stick to that. Like I did the Colombiana by Sanlúcar, also very classical things, minimal rasgados. So I'll still have them because I love that music, but I have no delusions of like, being. Yeah.
Would you ever perform like the Guajiras de Lucia at a
I wanted
concert?
to, but honestly, it's hard to play that thing on a classical guitar. Because my action's high. The guitar has very slow response. It's a classical guitar, so mine is a modern construction. It's like very deep kind of sound. It doesn't have that immediate response that a flamenco guitar has. So to play on it, it's like you're trying to. My friends and I make a joke about it. It's like wanting to drive a sports car, but you have a tractor. So it's like I'm driving a tractor, but I'm trying to drive it at a sports car.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I want to. If I did the zapateado as well, maybe I could pair them.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Yeah, it would be cool.
For some of the listeners that aren't too keen on exactly what's the main difference between the approach or the attack between classical and flamenco, can you describe it from your point of view, like in terms of techniques?
And I don't know if I'm gonna get it right, but people ask me like which one's more difficult, which genre is. I feel like they're difficult or easy. Then neither is easy, but really they're difficult for two different reasons. When I listen to a flamenco player, what I hear is power. Like there is power in the attack that might not have the most delicate, beautiful sound, although sometimes they get beautiful sound in the instrument. But it's almost like expected that if you're going to do like a fast picado passage, it's going to be like a harder sound, maybe closer
Safe
to the
to say that there's more of a harsher attack in
it's
their
a
picking.
Powerful attack that in classical playing, it wouldn't be accepted. Like if I played with that much attack, like hard attack, on the strings, and I was playing classical pieces, my technique would be criticized as like out of control, too heavy, So in classical, you absolutely need power. If there's volume, you need to give you volume, but it has to be still beautiful without that edge, even if I'm playing Spanish music, because it's just, we're a little bit more hoity-toity here. But in flamenco, if you play with the delicate touch, it's just like, what are you doing? It has its place, but probably not everywhere. And when I play flamenco, I sound like a classical guitarist playing flamenco because like my attack is not that hard.
I'm sure there's some purists or criticizers
down
there that start saying that it's done with that.
Well, the fact that I'm holding the guitar as a classical guitar is like, I mean, I don't care. I'm fully aware of what's happening there.
Of course.
But that's my technique. Like all these times, I've worked on making it more delicate. Like that's the whole thing, right? So I would have to play it differently. But that's what makes it harder or more difficult in flamenco, that power and the precision and rhythm.
Okay.
That's difficult. There's no rubatos. Like maybe if you're playing a taranta, there's like a little bit of freedom. But if you're playing bolerias, there's no rubato in bolerias, it's in time.
Right.
Where in classical music, sometimes pieces require rhythm and sometimes you need to finesse. Like even the rhythmic pieces, you keep the big beat, but you need to move the middle so that it's
a little bit of a different degree of the rubato and
For romantic music, definitely a lot. Even in Bach, like if you play it totally straight, like people say there's no rubato in Bach, there is. It's just that you have to be tasteful about it. If I play it completely straight with not manipulating the beat at all, it's going to sound boring.
Right.
But the way you do it, it still flows. It's just you have to do just phrase it, But with flamenco, it's just more precise, I feel. But I do love it. I absolutely,
It's more of a driving rhythmic force.
I went to so many during the Flamenco Festival here and the Paco de Lucia tribute that they had.
Yeah, I was jealous.
I went to so many concerts.
To see all your Instagram posts about being here.
We talked about that.
Yeah. What was your favorite concert?
I went to the one in Carnegie Hall. I loved that one. It was like a medley only because like they played Paco's music, right? So that was cool, like very nostalgic.
It was an all-star cast.
Yeah, and every single piece they played, I'm like, I know that one. It's like, like the I loved all the guitar ones, but the one that really stood out to me, which I wasn't necessarily expecting, and it's not guitar related. I went to the Spanish National Ballet concert that they had at the Guitar Festival.
Okay.
And seeing it was not necessarily full-on flamenco music. It was Spanish, obviously, but the dancing was like more classical dancing with flamenco. Like dancer absolutely had the zapateo. There is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So they had that, but they were like dressed more like classic without like the vibrant costumes and stuff. The first half was to orchestral music, and it was really cool. And then the second half, that's when they had like the typical like 2-3 guitarists playing in unison mostly. I guess it's for power, percussion, palmas, and voice. And that was more like what you expect from like flamenco music.
Right.
And then the dancing was like this mix. It was still kind of classical dancing, but they still felt flamenco. That one was really cool. And it was not necessarily guitar. It was just
a little bit more of theatrical flamenco. And
yeah, I really enjoyed that. And they did Almoraima, Paco de Lucía's Almoraima as an encore.
Nice.
That was cool.
Yeah, very cool. Jumping over to being an educator, what do you think is the problem that holds back most of your just amateur guitarists that are just trying to do it for a side passion and they struggle with it for years and can't pass a certain level? Is there anything that you've seen as a pattern that holds people back? Is it lack of practice? Is it not
lack of practicing in hours? It's lack of actually practicing versus just playing.
Lack of focus in practice?
Like literally practicing. Because when people say practicing, I could sit and play for 3 hours and achieve nothing.
Right.
Like, you're just playing. Or I could sit down for an hour and actually practice what I'm doing, meaning like break the piece apart, practice a small section at a slow tempo, listen to what's coming out of my guitar. If something's buzzing, maybe fix it. If I'm using the wrong fingers, like actually practicing, right?
So playing versus practicing.
I think if I had to generalize, that's the first thing that happens, that when an amateur is playing, like, or hobbyist is playing without an instructor, what they do is they just play over and over and over again. They'll make the same mistake over and over again. They enjoy the process, but then they're surprised why they're not improving, or like they can't play anything more difficult. It's just because they're not actually practicing.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was curious about. It's funny that you mentioned that.
Lack of metronome use. Yeah. No one uses the metronome. Like if I don't make them, no slow practicing. They just literally play the piece wherever tempo they can. If something's messy, they attribute it to the fact that like, oh, well, I'm not a professional, so whatever. But no, like if that piece is not that hard, that's not a good excuse. You could absolutely do it well if you actually practice to do it well.
Yeah, I think it's like a little bit of laziness because they just want to do like what would be considered more like almost like a concert run through all the time, which is the last thing you're supposed to be doing.
It's the icing on the cake at the end.
After you clean it up, you shouldn't always be performing the whole piece. You should be, if you have a limited amount of time, it's better just to work on
that. I mean, if I'm learning something, if I can't play it, there's no run throughs. Like I'll start learning a piece by like reading through it, but then I have to slow it down, practice it if there are difficult sections. That's what I noticed, like when they start taking lessons, they learn how to practice. And then still some of them never do it. So, but the ones that latch onto it and actually start practicing and trust the process, because people say like, I personally think like if you're having too much fun when you're practicing, you probably aren't doing it right. Not to say that you shouldn't like the process. Practicing is work. It's not fun. Playing is fun. So if you're having too much fun, unless like you really, really enjoy like that tedious repeating, which can be fun, unless that's what's happening, you probably are not really practicing, because it can be annoying. Like you're doing the same thing 10 times in a row, 20 times in a row, slowly to a ticker. But if you trust that process, you do that for a couple of weeks. And then 3 weeks down the road, you play through the piece. It's going to sound much better than that first time. So
yeah, that's a great
that
point.
Would be
that's the biggest one you think you've seen. Yeah,
absolutely. It's not even I'm not counting like bad technique. That's very common as well, just like literally not holding your hands in a way is going to make it possible for you to play well. If we take that away, then it's playing versus practicing.
Well, that's still connected to the playing versus practicing, because they're not correcting something, they're just letting it slip.
It could be just like lack of knowledge, right? Like so many times, like just the way they hold the guitar, I'm like, listen, no way are you going to be able to play anything slightly more difficult than a couple of notes if you're holding your guitar that way, or if you're holding your hand that way. So
you won't be able to pass a certain, you're never going to be able to break a certain limit.
I think that's when when someone's doing it without an instructor, like when they're doing it themselves, they don't have and I don't want to generalize, because there's some people who are very like intelligent and intuitive. They can tell, and even though they're self-taught, they pick up on things, and it could be from their life experience, for whatever their career is, like they know. But most of the time, they don't have the foresight to know that this road takes you somewhere else. You need to get on that road to go where you want to go. And as a professional,
that's the power of having somebody mentor you and somebody assess you from the outside. I mean, I mean, for those who didn't know, even that's why I had some sessions with you a few years ago, because I was having some trouble with a couple of techniques. I had you, and I also got some help from Grisha Goryachev, also with some picado enhancements.
He's amazing at that.
And yeah, both of you helped me a ton, because it was just a question like little minor adjustments, and like in something that one can't see when they're doing it themselves, because you don't realize what it is. You're too much involved in it.
That moderate tempo, and it works great. And then because at the moment you can't do it at, like, let's say picado at Grisha's speed, right? But he can do it. So like he knows that what it takes to be able to get to that speed. And if you're kind of like a little off, you realize like, okay, you get this, you're only going to hit a certain level, and then you're going to hit a wall. And you need to kind of like not keep going through that wall, but actually go slightly to the other side.
I mean, I'm not trying to catch up to Grisha's speed, but no, he just helped me with a really subtle adjustment, just pivoting my hand position a little bit. And it's funny, one little minor detail like that will make the world of a difference.
Really, like the way you hold the instrument, the way you hold your hands, it really like changes things.
So that's why I would say, even if you're learning on your own, that's why it always helps to, even if it's to get even if it's not to get a regular amount of sessions, just to have somebody assess you every here and there, or at least once in a while, just to make sure you're on the right path. Or otherwise, you're going to keep going this way if you have the bad technique, like you said. So
yeah, exactly. And yeah, especially if you've never had like formal training where you like really understand how things work, it just helps to be put on the right track.
The last thing I was going to touch about is your social media and content creation process. Something I get a kick out of is seeing you respond to some of the people that are a little either on the have critical minds, or purists, and especially
here's the thing: what you see, not a lot of people see, because I get a lot of like comments where people teach me how to play guitar, and it's fine. Like if you can play and you teach me how to play, I'm more than grateful. But usually the comments come from people who are like, and I usually don't reply to those because it's just, but sometimes I get really ridiculous comments where they're just like, you wonder like, what was this person thinking? And those usually I share with a small group of people. I don't share them publicly. I know some of them
you just share them with
I share it with like close group of friends, and I make fun of them. And so what they don't know when they make these stupid comments, that there's another very sarcastic person sitting on the other end, that's me, making fun of them in private.
Right.
I think when you're like on social media, it comes with the territory. You put something out there.
You're just used to it by now, or you don't let it.
No.
It doesn't get under your skin anymore.
No, I'm like 39. Come on, like I've had enough like life experience to just not care. I feel bad sometimes, like with the younger. I don't want to differentiate male or female, but like sometimes I see comments underneath like younger girls' posts, and being female, like I maybe relate to it more. And if you're young and you don't have like that much self-esteem yet, I can see like it will affect you. You just have to learn to ignore it, because like there's just stupid comments that have nothing to do with the reality. And you don't even know who's sitting there. It's just like some guy sitting in his like mom's basement, just like just writing nasty things. I never cared. Like I think maybe when I was younger, I remember one particular comment. It wasn't even underneath my video. It was like a video was shared on a blog somewhere, and it was under La Vida Breve. Actually, I remember, because I was like, I was in my 20s, and someone decided to spend, I don't know, half an hour of their life, write out a whole entire paragraph on how that performance was really bad. I'm like, now if I read it, I would have just laughed, but like back then I read it and I'm like, why would someone do that? It's like, because it wasn't a bad performance. That La Vida Breve is like, okay, it could be better, but like it wasn't bad. But I didn't have enough of the self-awareness to just be like, whatever. And that affected me. Like that, I read that, I'm like, that's not nice. And I think I even like, that day I had to play a concert, which was stupid of me to check comments before a concert. And when I was playing, it messes with your head, but you learn. That was like more than 10 years ago. Now, if I read them, if someone's teaching me how to play guitar, I'm like, okay, another one, so, and you're allowed not to like someone's performance, right? Like, it's just, the difference is that if I don't like someone's performance, I don't write it.
Yeah. Like, it still blows my mind that people find the time to comment that when, instead of just moving on. And
I personally just move on. Like, I appreciate the amount of work that goes into it. Maybe it wasn't to my liking, but I'm not gonna, you know, decide to spend my life writing about it. So you get used to it, and you have to realize, like, to anyone who's posting there, maybe they are younger and stuff, it's not about you. It's more about the person writing the comment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I say I feel sorry for them, because I mean, in the end, they're coming from a bad place in their mindset, or if they're writing stuff like that, that things that are unfathomable for me to think of writing.
It's never going to be to your face, because no one would have the guts to kind of, I mean, maybe they will, but no one has come to my face
would ever say
and
something
told
like
me
that.
something.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's easy to hide behind a screen, just be like, an anonymous username, right? Like, you can't even like tag who it is.
I've been lucky enough where I haven't gotten that many like crazy comments, but some of the videos that get a little bit more viral start getting bigger groups. So then I start getting some of the crazy comments. And somebody the other day even started off nice. It's like, oh, I really like the way you played that song, but, and then it followed with the big insults, just like a physical attack insult, and I'm like, yeah, like, what's the point? Why did you feel the need to personally attack me if you like the song?
Yeah, that's when that's
because they have some insecurity or something, I guess.
Usually it's that. It sounds snobby to say that, but it's kind of, it is that. It's an insecurity within them.
Yeah.
Jealousy, whatever. Like, because if you're like a really good guitarist yourself, or maybe you're not good, but you really understand how much work went into that person to be able to play at a level that they're playing, you wouldn't write that.
Right.
So, but if you have like this inner thing like this, that's just like you're jealous somehow, you want to take that out somehow.
Yeah, it's exactly
the internet is the
like
great place to do it. So
yeah.
So I ignore them. I can honestly say does not affect me at all. I do like making fun of them though.
Yeah.
Oh my God, are they funny? Like, some of them just like ridiculous funny.
It's well deserved to have laughed.
Oh yeah. It's just, I do it tactfully within a small group. I'm not going to do it publicly.
We're not being as bad as them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to embarrass them publicly. I am going to do it in small groups, but they don't know about it. So now they do. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I don't want to take up more of your time. But where can people look you up if they want to see you and they haven't heard you perform? Your YouTube is your Instagram.
I mean, if there are not that many Gohar Vardanyans who play guitar. So literally, if you Google me, Gohar Vardanyan, I think even if you just put my name.
I mean, I'll have her name in the your name in the show in the
my
show notes
website
and all
is
that. So.
fairly frequently updated if there are new performances. Instagram and YouTube is probably like the most. Instagram is the most frequent. YouTube it's always there, and Facebook. Yeah, it's just I'm not that hard to find.
I'll make sure to include everything in the show notes so you can look her up. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.